You are listening to a free version of the Majority Report with Sam Steeder. To support this show and get another 15 minutes of daily program, go to majority.fm, please.
The Majority Report with Sam Steeder.
It is Tuesday, April 17th, 2018. My name is Sam Steeder. This is the 5-time award-winning Majority Report. We are broadcasting live steps from the industrially ravaged Gowanus Canal in the heartland of America, downtown Brooklyn, USA. On the program today, Associate Professor of Political Science at Roosevelt University in Chicago, David Faris, on It's Time to Fight Dirty, how Democrats can build a lasting majority. Meanwhile, North Korea and South Korea are talking peace. And more intrigue around Trump attorney Michael Cohen as Sean Hannity joins the fray. 2 days after they're announced, Donald Trump reverses the Russia sanctions. Just 1 second. Bipartisan Senate push. They want to update the presidential blank check for war.
That sounds promising.
And will Mike Pompeo be the first Secretary of State to get a no vote in committee, but a confirmation on the Senate floor?
Making history.
And while Sessions wants to end asylum for victims of domestic abuse and gang violence, Republican taxes cuts broadly unpopular, except with offshore tax dodgers. And the FCC broadband advisor arrested for fraud.
You know what I like about
Give
that?
her a promotion.
I like that poll because that's like, there's people thinking materially right there.
Yeah. I'm not going to vote against my own
No, everybody else doesn't like it, and the people that it was good for like it. Okay.
How do you get them to admit it?
Utah will vote on Medicaid expansion, and Alex Jones hit with more lawsuits, this time parents from Sandy Hook. And lastly, SCOTUS makes a decision today, pushes back on the easy deportation of people not convicted of a serious crime. All this and more on today's program, ladies and gentlemen. Of course, the big story is that is out there is that Sean Hannity is somehow implicated in the in Michael Cohen. The real shocker is that anyone could actually type or, I guess, dictate the words, "This is a test for Sean Hannity's integrity as a journalist." Like there are actually people out there who are like, wow, Sean Hannity, this could be trouble for him. He did not disclose that he was compromised in some fashion. It's almost impossible to wrap your head around that. The guy is literally an advisor for Donald Trump and has been the entire time.
Nobody has Sean Hannity.
Nobody listens to
Nobody has Sean Hannity.
Nobody has Sean Hannity.
Do you remember that GIF that was going around of a dog holding a phone and it was waiting for Sean Hannity to get some answers?
But the question is, all right, so this is the long and short of it. And we'll get into more of this in a moment. But the long and short of it is this, that I would also add that Michael Cohen, not very good at picking lawyers. But apparently they were in court. The President Trump and Cohen want dibs on the evidence that the Southern District of New York investigators found as they essentially raided all of his domiciles, Cohen's. And in the course of that, Cohen had to reveal that he had 3 clients in the past 2 years. One was Donald Trump. Another was a major Republican donor. For both these guys, what Michael Cohen did is basically provide hush money to women who were claiming to have had sexual relations with his clients. So he says he has a third client. The third client does not want his name revealed and is exercising lawyer-client privilege. The court says, the following. I don't understand the argument that just because this undisclosed client consulted with Mr. Cohen, that's somehow embarrassing or an invasion of privacy. That's not enough under case law. And I don't understand it factually. I understand that he doesn't want his name out there, but that's not enough under the law. In other words, the court is saying, I'm compelling you to answer this question, and you're telling me, well, he doesn't want his name revealed because it's embarrassing. And I'm telling you that's like... that we're in a grown-up courtroom. That doesn't count.
I have a very strong objection. Embarrassing.
So the lawyer for Cohen says, well, I understand, Your Honor. I mean, we understand, Mr. Cohen, and frankly, derivatively, our ethical obligations to be as we laid them out in our letter this morning. But if the court disagrees and rules against us, we'll do whatever the court directs us to do. In other words, he's saying, we just want to make sure that Cohen doesn't get disbarred by revealing the name. He's not really protecting his friend. He's protecting himself. But if you tell us that we're obligated to do it and my client won't get disbarred, we'll tell you. And the court says, yeah, I'm directing you to disclose the name now. And in other words, do you want me to take the stand and say it, or should I just give you a piece of paper that you told me to write? And the court says, whatever you feel most comfortable with. And then the lawyer says, Sean Hannity. That was it. And then Sean Hannity gets on the radio and he's like, I don't understand why everybody's making such a big deal of this. He's one of 3 clients. Here's a guy who's been doing the news for 25 years, maybe more. And he doesn't understand why it's a big deal. And for whatever reason, Cohen says he's one of 3 clients. And then Hannity's like, I'm not a client. I just asked some questions and asked for attorney-client privilege. And maybe I gave him $10 to seal the deal. This is just weird. I don't think you actually have to pay to assume attorney-client privilege. I don't think that money has to exchange. I think you have to have some type of agreement, probably in writing, just like a letter of, I'm going to waive my fee or whatever. I'm going to do, because certainly you can do pro bono work for somebody. And I don't know why Sean Hannity needs pro bono work. He gets paid like $30 million a year. Now, granted, that doesn't go as far as it used to. You can, taxes are very high, apparently, on $30 million. But here's Sean Hannity on the radio. He can't imagine why there's such a hubbub about this.
I guess he did some type of work for some Republican guy, so he's figuring, he must have did a big settlement case for Hannity. That's not what happened, ever.
It's pretty
I was never
upsetting.
Involved with any matter between me and any third party. That was, no. Like, for example, I have all sorts of lawyers, some of which people would know their names. I just think it's hilarious that, I have 15 million messages flying in and emails flying in even as we speak.
Oh, I know. I have them, too.
But by the way, I think that it just shows that Michael was doing his due diligence and being totally thorough about anybody that he might have had attorney-client privilege with. But I mean, in terms of anything of any significance, none. Zero. I mean, what else can you say?
I mean, if there's no significance to anything they discussed, I'm sure there would be no problem in waiving that attorney-client privilege. Sean just asked me whether or not he should secure a title for his new house in the Hamptons. That's all. And I said yes. It was a friendly.
I mean, what else can you say except that, okay, I never gave him a retainer, never received an invoice, never paid any fees. I might have handed him $10. I definitely want you attorney-client privilege on this, something like that. I requested that privilege with him when I would ask him, well, this just came up. What do you think about this? Or what do you think about that? I assumed, and obviously he assumed, and he kept his word, that they were confidential and attorney-client. But I never had any matter with him between me and any third party. How is it possible that NBC and ABC goes absolutely, and MSNBC and CNN goes absolutely off the rails over a simple thing like that?
All right, pause it. I know how, because Cohen said your name in the courtroom, and he did not say over almost 300 million other Americans' names. There was just 3 names, and that's how that happened. And later in the program, we'll play the audio of everybody on Fox also going bonkers over Sean Hannity. All right, so check this out. Are you tired of seeing ads when you want to read the news? You sick of social media filtering your news? Feel like you're missing out on breaking news? Download Smart News for free in the App Store or Google Play Store and get your news in real time from over 300 trusted sources. CNN, Vice, Politico, HuffPost, The Hill, more. The Hill. Smart News' algorithm automatically curates the must-read stories that matter now. So you can get your news in just 1 minute. Plus, you can read the news wherever you go, even when you're offline. No wonder why Smart News already has more than 25 million users worldwide. It's actually 25 million and one. Today, right before the show started, I hopped on Smart News and I was like, Brendan, why is it saying that South Korea and North Korea are making peace? And he goes,
what?
Oh, I didn't see that.
They weren't doing nothing, boss.
They did.
As far as I know, the status quo remains.
And Brendan started getting a little bit nervous, and he said, well, let me get you a cup of coffee. I mean, obviously.
You want some coffee?
I don't.
No improvement on the Korean Peninsula yet. I would be real careful of just jumping at whatever you see.
And it's good. You can, I mean, for me, of course, I stay in my one silo of political news. But you could hit like entertainment and what else? Let me see what are the other silos. I mean, honestly, like I know there are other silos, and I never look at them. Entertainment, lifestyle, U.S. I guess U.S. I would hit. Politics is obviously the only one that I hit. Sports, tech, biz, science, buzz, discover, settings. I don't know. I never got that far. But it's all right there. Smart News, available for free in the Apple App Store or Google Play Store. All right, we're going to take a quick break. When we come back, David Faris on Democrats, time to fight dirty. We are back. Sam Seder on the Majority Report on the phone. It's a pleasure to welcome to the program Associate Professor of Political Science at the Roosevelt University in Chicago, David Faris, author of It's Time to Fight Dirty, How Democrats Can Build a Lasting Majority. David, welcome to the program.
Thanks for having me on, Sam.
All right, so let's start with the premise of your book, which is that the Republicans have, and this is something I complain to, I'm not saying every one of our guests, but guests where it makes some sense, that Republicans, when they get into office, the first order of business for them is always to do something that edifies their power and helps them stay into power. Give us a couple of examples of those.
Well, I mean, I think, the most prominent example in recent years is, holding up the Merrick Garland appointment to the Supreme Court. When you talk about edifying power, what they're really doing is sort of pushing the boundaries of what's acceptable and legal in the constitutional framework, and they push that boundary as far as they can to get up right to the edge of legality. Sort of violating existing understandings of how politics should work. Another great example is Republicans changing the rules of the governor's power in North Carolina when they were on their way out last year. So it's really, it's using perfectly legal mechanisms that are violations of existing understandings to sort of aggrandize power for themselves.
And I would add to that voter ID. I mean, in 2010, and the redistricting. All right. I mean, the voting ID is a perfect example of in some instances, it went beyond the law. They certainly got with the Supreme Court the gutting of the pre-clearance provisions, so they were able to sort of go further than they would otherwise. But they've thrown. I think there was just something that came out yesterday about a representative from Wisconsin, essentially finding that the election in 2016, anyways, was a function of their voter ID law.
Absolutely, yeah, and the voter ID is a great example of the Supreme Court ruled on this. They said these laws are okay for now, right? And they passed them anyway. They know there's no voter fraud, and they passed these laws because they know that it disadvantages the Democratic coalition. And that's a great example of Republicans sort of using the power that's been vested in them by the voters to improve their own coalition's prospects in the next election, and they're really good about keeping their eye on these kinds of laws that they can manipulate to improve their fortunes at the next election. And it's maddening, that they do this, and then Democrats are just sort of like, well, bipartisanship is important. We don't want to look like we're abusing our power, but it's like they're the victims of this one-sided series of escalations, one after the other.
And I would add also, I mean, while we're at it, I mean, it's almost every single the campaign finance laws, rolling those back, things like Citizens United. It's one thing to say that both corporations and unions can now give unfettered amounts of money. But the fact of the matter is that corporations and unions have a disparate amount of money available. It's not even close. And we see, I would add, too, that particularly in the states, but they're trying it on a federal level as well, they undercut the power of unions. And there's been plenty of studies that shows that that's going to help them in terms of like 3 or 4% at the polls.
Absolutely, yeah, and the Supreme Court, which is in Republican hands because of what they did to Merrick Garland, is about to gut the unions with this decision that's coming out about the collection of dues. And that's really going to cripple a lot of unions around the country. It's bad for turnout. It's bad for workers' rights. And they know exactly what they're doing. They're using the law to disadvantage their adversaries, and they're going to keep doing it, until we do it right back to them.
And all right, so and you're talking obviously about the Janus case. That's going to be resolved in June, and that I think it's a foregone conclusion. I think with a lot of people, we were going to see this with Friedrich, and then I'll say this because maybe it's not appropriate for you to say, but blessedly, Anton Scalia exited in a very timely fashion. Let's all right. So let's talk about what would be your agenda. Would you suggest to the Democrats? They take the House in 2020. Let's say they take, or I should say, in 2018. They take the Senate in 2020. They take the presidency in 2020. They come to you and they say, David, we heard your interview on the Majority Report. Remind us again, what are the steps that we take? What is the first order of steps that we should take in terms of edifying our power?
Sure. So, I mean, if you look at it, there's a few things that are like what I call low-hanging fruit. This is stuff that's amenable to laws passed, in the first month, the next time Democrats have unified control in D.C. I think the first of those things really ought to be statehood for Washington, D.C. and Puerto Rico. These are it's not just would help us; it's the right thing to do. American citizens in D.C. and Puerto Rico have no voting representation in Congress. And we see the consequences of that after Hurricane Maria in Puerto Rico in particular. And that's a move that would add 4 Democratic senators to our column. If we had done this under Obama, we'd have the Senate right now. And it would probably send an all-Democratic a delegation to the House too. So, this is something that's absolutely morally justified. It would immediately help us in terms of the political calculus, the numbers in the House and the Senate. And the only thing stopping Democrats from doing this is sort of a lack of imagination and a lack of commitment.
And what has stopped that? I mean, there's a couple of things that you call for that, and we'll get there in a second, like the National Voting Rights Act. I mean, if 2001, right, like if the election of 2000 didn't teach Democrats the necessity for this stuff, it's almost impossible to imagine why they would do this. But why hasn't? Why have Democrats been so slow to do something like providing statehood for Washington, D.C. or providing statehood for Puerto Rico? I mean, why did that not even seem to come up in 2009?
That's a great question. I mean, the last time D.C. was really on the agenda was 93, and there was a bill, there was a vote in the House, and it went down. Almost 2-1. And a lot of the people that provided the votes to defeat that were these sort of like racist white Southern Democrats who were about to go extinct in the 94 sweep for the Republicans. And I think, in 2009, I don't think there was the same kind of energy for DC statehood in particular that you see now. So the last 10 years, there's been a really well-organized effort by the D.C. Statehood Coalition to put a constitution together. We have these shadow senators to the U.S. Senate now. I interviewed one of them for the book, and I think it just wasn't on the radar. And I think for Puerto Rico, I think there probably does need to be another referendum there. It's been a very contentious issue in Puerto Rican politics about sort of what the final status should be for the island. And there's too many choices, so right. The next time we do a referendum, we really need to do it with instant runoff voting so people can sort of vote their hearts with their first choice, but then produce a majority for something. Because what we've seen a couple of times is when you have the 3 options of independence and statehood and then the status quo, you're going to split the vote 3 ways. So they need to do something that's going to send a clear message to Washington, like this is what we want, And every president since Ford has promised to respect the wishes of Puerto Rico, but nobody does it, And I think that's pretty simple, Nobody has to answer to these people, right? And nobody's going to lose their seat in the House or the Senate because they don't do the right thing. And so that's just something we really have to change. We really have to find the courage to pay the price and to do it on day one. That's really, this, like I said, like low-hanging fruit.
And I wonder too if the amount of people who have left the island in the wake of Maria and have maybe resettled in a place like Florida, for instance. I've heard reports of up to a couple 100,000 people. If that doesn't change the politics as well, I mean, maybe you start to see politicians running for state office, federal office out of Florida, starting to push this more.
Yeah, I mean, I would think that you'd see some consequences in Florida. Trump's margin in Florida was 100,000, 114,000. If we have 300,000 Puerto Ricans in Florida now, and if we can get them registered to vote, there could be real consequences. But I think, the long-term solution really is to confer upon the people on the island the same rights that we have. When your representative doesn't do his or her job, when they don't get FEMA the right plan to address a major crisis, somebody's got to pay with their seat for that. And right now, Puerto Ricans simply don't have that power. All
right. Well, so statehood for D.C., statehood for Puerto Rico. What's next on the agenda?
So another piece of low-hanging fruit. You mentioned it. You alluded to it, but there's a lot of efforts at the state level to do things like automatic voter registration and to change some of these felony disenfranchisement laws. But I think the Constitution's elections clause very clearly gives Congress the right to do this nationally, with a big piece of legislation, makes voter ID laws illegal, restores the rights of all former felons. I would go a step further and say never deprive people of their rights in the first place, and creates a national election holiday. And does automatic voter registration. That's all stuff that's clearly within Congress's power legally. could be done in the first month of a Democratic administration, and that would add, I mean, literally millions of votes to the Democratic column in every election. They estimate there's 1.6 million people who are deprived of the right to vote in the state of Florida just on the basis of these laws. And so, a little back of the envelope math says that would really change the political dynamics in Florida, and it would change the dynamics everywhere. I mean, I think we saw in Virginia what happens when you restore the voting rights of ex-felons. The Democrats overperformed their polls there, and that's because Governor McAuliffe re-enfranchised over 170,000 people before the election. So these are, again, it's like the right thing to do, right? We have a moral problem. Depriving people of the right to vote forever if they commit a crime is completely flies in the spirit of our criminal justice system as we imagine it should work, right?
And are
the
these
right thing
things...
to do, and yeah.
All right, so I mean, they're easily morally justifiable, but from a political standpoint, is there any liability? I mean, if Terry McAuliffe can do this in Virginia, is there really any way where a Democrat, and I can see Republicans voting against this because they are fundamentally, for curbing voting rights in any way you can. I mean, they've established that over and over again. But is there any indication that if the Democrats came in January of 2021 and on, let's say, February 1, voted the National Voting Rights Act that provides, ex-felons would reestablish their right and got rid of voter IDs and automatic registration, would there be any controversy in terms or any political blowback to that? I can't imagine any.
I don't think so. I mean, I think no matter what we do, obviously, there's going to be some counter mobilization on the right. But I think that these arguments are pretty self-evident, and I don't think there's been a backlash in Virginia. I mean, you're going to have the Republicans, shouting and screaming about, Democrats want criminals to vote and stuff like this. But I think that message is going to fall on deaf ears. And I think at the end of the day, most people are not that into electoral law, and I think even if there's a little bit of blowback at first, I think it'll be gone by the time the next election happens. And that's really the key, right? Is we're trying to set ourselves up for the 2022 midterms, and to not see what happened in 2010 happen again, right?
Right.
We in order to get this country on the right track, we've got to win more than one or two national elections in a row. It's got to be 3, 4, or 5. And right now, the electoral laws are really work against us in a structural way that I think most people don't see on a day-to-day basis.
Well, let's go into so we're climbing a little further up the tree, as it were, and grabbing fruit that may not be the lowest of hanging. What's next?
Well, I think one thing we really need to consider is reform to the court system. So, to me, this sort of the assassination of the archduke moment here is the Merrick Garland fiasco, in which Republicans stole the swing seat on the Supreme Court. There's a conservative majority on the court right now that's about to issue verdict after verdict that's going to cut into our political power, and they stole that seat. Like Neil Gorsuch is illegitimate. And it points to the way that the Republicans have been escalating these court wars, by manipulating the sort of vagueness, the lack of specificity in the Constitution about the procedure by which the president gets to make these appointments. The Constitution says advice and consent by the Senate. That's all it says, right? So Republicans were right when they said, we're not legally obligated to consider this nomination. And to me, there's really no moral or ethical difference between stealing the swing seat and coming into power and adding justices to the court, because the Constitution doesn't say 9. It doesn't say anything, right? The Constitution is actually incredibly vague about the powers of the courts. And there is a movement afoot on the judicial right to do a lot of crazy things. There is a right-wing court packing plan out there by a guy named Steve Calabrese. He's a law professor at Northwestern, one of the leading figures in the originalist movement. They're talking about jurisdiction stripping. That's, Congress passes a law that says Supreme Court can't rule about abortion. You had Ted Cruz and John McCain and Richard Burr all, before the election, endorse the idea of holding seats on the Supreme Court open so that Hillary Clinton couldn't fill them. So there's a lot worse coming at us down the pike if we don't act first. And because it's within our legal power to add seats to the Supreme Court, to enlarge the federal judiciary and pack it with, the most outrageous set of liberals that we can get our hands on, who are like, 35-year-old Doogie Howsers. I think that's exactly what we have to do. And one of the things that we have on our side here is that, as you know, Democrats have won the popular vote for the presidency 6 of the last 7 elections. By all rights, there should already be a liberal majority on the court. If you add up all the Senate votes, we've won 30 million more votes than Republicans since 1992. So the American people have spoken very clearly, right? They want living constitutionalists on the court who will make law that makes sense for modern society instead of being committed to these 230-year-old design mistakes. So I think it's something we really have to consider, because if we don't do it, it's going to be done to us.
Have the Democrats already blown this, though? I mean, because you and I know these stats. I share your outrage about Neil Gorsuch as well, and, Merrick Garland. But didn't Barack Obama and haven't the Democrats since then blow this? Because if you and I were to walk out and say the names Merrick Garland, 8 out of 10 people would just look at us as if they had never heard of that. The whole Supreme Court thing, they barely remember it. I would say that Mitch McConnell has brought up the blocking of Merrick Garland in the news far more times than any Democrat I can specifically name, and has taken more credit for it than Democrats have said. Like, this has been a complete abuse of the system. Like, there's no predicate set that they did anything that was as outrageous as we know that it was.
Yeah, I know. And it makes my blood boil. And you're absolutely right. I don't think Democrats did enough to campaign behind it. And when it happened, I mean, I don't know about you, but when it happened, I was like, surely they're going to pay a price for this, right? Like, this should be sort of like transparently obvious.
They weren't paying a price in real time. I mean, the real price would have been Barack Obama saying, all right, you're going to reject Merrick Garland? Here's the next guy. Here's the next woman. Here's the next one, and just keep putting up new people so there was a story every day that had to be covered, but it just went away.
Yeah, I mean, it was depressing the way that the party kind of resigned itself to this situation, and I think that they assumed that Republicans would pay a price in November, and I think as it became clear that Donald Trump was going to be the nominee, they were like, well, whatever, we're going to get to fill the seat anyway, and that's just not what happened. But I think the fact that it didn't happen, there's a lesson in there for us too, right, which is that we can do this. We can return the favor, and in all likelihood, the public is going to forget about it, and not just that. I mean, I think there's an added benefit that kind of doing a real hardball move here will get our base excited. We'll show them that we're willing to fight for the courts in the same way that the Republicans are.
This is a broader question, but it applies in this instance, and it applies to some of the other things as we get sort of higher up that tree and go for the higher hanging fruit. Democrats, I mean, if you look at a comparison between Democrats and Republicans in terms of polling, in terms of the question of compromise, right? And we can, and I don't know if there's been, I mean, how deeply or how granular questions around this idea of compromise have been asked. But consistently over the years, it seems to me that Democrats want their politicians to compromise. I mean, I think at one point it was like 75% of Democrats want their politicians to compromise, whereas Republicans, it's like 20% want them to compromise. The other 80% want them to, come hell or high water, be ideological and intransigent. How do we deal with that problem? And do you think that problem still exists?
I do think it still exists. I think it's on the decline. I mean, I think you can see over the past year that the energy and the sort of the policy energy on the activist left is behind obstruction. We saw this with the DACA fight, where I think a lot of the activist organizations took this really, really hard line, including people I thought were pretty pragmatic overall, like Indivisible, who were like, just like shut it down, right? We need to get this done. And I think that message went over really well with the base. I do think you're right. I think that Democrats generally expect more compromise from their leadership than Republicans at this point too. But I mean that's an opportunity for us too, because the second piece of the court plan is to first offer a kind of an olive branch to the Republicans, and that olive branch would be a constitutional amendment. And the constitutional amendment would do a few things, right? Most importantly, it would cap service on the Supreme Court at 18 years, and it would give every president the right in every 4-year term to appoint 2 justices to the court. And you could do a lot of other things with that amendment. Like you could actually spell out what the Senate's obligations are. You could say, okay, you can reject one person. You have to consider the second. And if you reject the second, the president can fill the seat unilaterally. So there's all sorts of maneuvers that you can put in that amendment so that it reduces the temperature around these court wars and sort of takes them off the table as a major partisan battle. Now, I think that that'll be rejected by the Republican leadership, right? But it'll show our coalition, like, hey, we tried this bipartisan compromise. They said no, and this is what we're going to do instead. So we have the moral high ground, and then we also play the hardball. If the moral high ground is abandoned by our adversaries, then we fill it with what we want to fill it with.
So, all right, and we have other I think items on the agenda, but I can't help but ask this question right now. Do you think that the Democratic leadership is up to this? Like even if those numbers, and I think they have, those compromise numbers by rank and file Democrats has changed. Does the Democratic Party have the leadership that is willing to do this, or are they sort of still stuck in a different era?
I think right now they're still stuck in the past. I think that they still are hoping against hope that the Republicans will come around and start governing the country like they did in the 70s and 80s again. And I don't think that's going to happen. And I think what is going to happen if we take power in 2020 and none of these Republicans retire or die, you're going to see major Democratic policy initiatives, something related to single payer. You're going to see it get struck down by the Supreme Court. And at that point, I think it's going to become crystal clear to the Democratic leadership that the manipulation that Republicans did a couple of years ago is going to have far-reaching effects into the future. It's going to mess up our policy agenda in the same way that like FDR's New Deal policies were getting struck down again and again. That was why he originally wanted to pack the courts. And I think that'll be a sort of an eye-opening moment for the coalition. That like we actually can't get anything that we want to get done. As long as the court is in the grips of this like sort of reactionary conservative majority. So in a sense, do I think they're going to do this on day one? Absolutely not. I think that they need to lose a couple of policy fights first, that are litigated in the courts, and then that will make it clear to the leadership that this is what we have to do. And if they won't do it, then we replace the leadership.
Okay, so there's also some procedural reform that you're suggesting in the Senate, and that is to get rid of the filibuster. Now we have lost, under Harry Reid, we got rid of the filibuster on presidential nominees and on the federal judiciary below the Supreme Court. Where would you get rid of the filibuster for legislation and for the Supreme Court at that point?
Absolutely, yeah. And this is one area where God strike me down, but I agree with the president that the filibuster itself it's an anti-democratic procedure. There are already enough choke points in the American political system to make it hard to get anything done. We don't need to add a supermajoritarian requirement in a legislative body that's already malapportioned, that's already dominated by conservative rural interests, and then add a 60-vote threshold in a 100-person chamber. It's nuts, And one of the reasons it's nuts, not just from a democratic theory perspective, but also, when the voters send people to Washington and they're like, get this, get X, Y, and Z done, and they can't get any of it done because they don't have a 60-vote threshold. I think that leads to a lot of frustration with the system. It leads to people sort of exiting, not voting, not having any confidence, not expressing any trust in the institutions. And so to me, I know that the filibuster is stopping some bad things from happening right now, but in a way, I think it'd be instructive for the American people to see, this is what happens when you send Republicans to Washington.
Right.
This is what you lose. These are the rights you lose. These are the policies that you lose. And the filibuster is going to be an issue because it's hard for me to see, even in a couple of wave scenarios, Democrats getting to 60 votes in the Senate in 2020. I think we have an outside shot. But even if we do, we still got the Joe Manchins and the Claire McCaskills to deal with. And I don't think that we're going to be able to play this kind of hardball. And I don't think we're going to get anything done, like literally anything, unless we eliminate the filibuster. Unless we want to have an administration where 2 years later, the only thing we can say is like, look at the person we appointed to the Supreme Court. That's about all Trump has going for him at this point. And partly that's because his allies won't eliminate the filibuster. And I think that we ought to. Right.
Well, and the record-breaking pace in terms of filling the federal judiciary as well, though, not just the Supreme Court. All right. So that's for Senate procedure. You also have a proposal that I think is a tough hill to climb. I understand why you're making it, but it involves California or California, right? Is that would be the
is that 7 syllables? Yeah, I think so.
Go ahead. Tell us that idea.
Sure. So, one of our big problems structurally for progressives moving forward is the U.S. Senate. The equal representation of the states is not just written into the Constitution, but it's written into the Constitution with a special provision that you can't deprive the states of it without their consent, which means functionally you could try to amend the Constitution. It's still not going to happen. So the 38 million people in California have the same 2 senators as the 700,000 people in Wyoming. It's preposterous. The founders had no way to foresee that there'd be these insane population disparities between the states. And so what you have right now is you probably have 29, 30 Republican-leaning states in the country, and you have 20 or 21 Democratic-leaning states. So that in a neutral partisan environment, take away the chaos and the idiocy and the incompetence of the Trump administration. In a neutral partisan environment, Democrats are at a structural disadvantage in the Senate. That means we're gonna be in the minority much more often than we're going to be in the majority. Even if we do everything right, even if we do single payer, even if we get the Sanders agenda through Congress, we're still going to be at a disadvantage because the Senate is tilted against us. And a lot of the power on the left is bottled up in California right now. Every day that the sun shines in the state of California, it is like the most progressive day in the history of California. Hillary Clinton won that state by 30 points. She won Orange County, which a Democrat hadn't won since FDR. And so I think we have to think seriously about dividing the state of California up to release some of that pent-up power, give it back to Californians. So I have a proposal in the book. I drew some maps, which, by the way, is insanely fun. I can see why European colonialists got hooked on it. I created 7 states, all of which would have voted for Hillary Clinton by a lot. It would not have been close. They all have access to the ocean. They all have a major city. And I think it would be beneficial, not just for Californians who I think, I do think there's a case to be made that the state is too big and too complex to be governed from Sacramento alone. There's a long history of people trying, different gambits to divide California from the very start of the state when Southern California didn't want to be a part of it. And you see this ballot initiative now, the 3 Californias, Tim Draper's thing. So the idea is out there. It's not like completely off the wall. But you're right. It'd be a big lift. We need a ballot initiative. We need an act of the California state legislature. We have a lot of work to do persuading Californians that this is in their interest. And so it would take a long time. It would take years. So the proposal is really, I think, an opportunity to put before the public the idea that we're going to be on the losing side of these Senate battles unless we revisit the conditions in California, unless we really think about dividing it up. It doesn't have to be 7. But we need Democrats drawing those maps because the proposal that's on the table right now would not create 3 Democratic states. So it all depends on where you draw the lines.
So is there, this is something that would have to emanate out of California, though, right? So there would be a lot of, this is one of those things where we would have to spend a lot of time convincing some of our friends in California, I guess.
Yeah, absolutely. And we'd need a progressive organization out there to do the legwork. Nobody's going to listen to this guy in Illinois telling you need to divide your state, right? But it's not unheard of. There have been movements to divide states before. I'm from New Jersey, and we had a ballot initiative in 1980 to split off the 8 counties of South Jersey and create the 51st state. Like when I was a kid, I dreamt about being the president of the Republic of South Jersey. So there've been these movements before. It's not prohibited by the Constitution. There are some procedures you have to follow, but it's totally doable. We need somebody to pick up the baton who's from California, who can get the word out, who can organize the signatures for the ballot initiative, and we also need to outflank the existing sort of divide California initiative because I think it's going to give the whole idea a bad name on the left if we don't get ahead of this.
Now, you also suggest looking at how we elect members of the House of Representatives, and there seems to be at least some impetus now, maybe at the Supreme Court, and there's certainly, Eric Holder and Obama have a project to deal with the radical gerrymandering that has been taking place. So at least there's like some notion of its import out there. Let me ask you this that seems to be missing from my perspective. And this was something that in 2008 was broadly, supposedly on the agenda, and that was card check, which would have made it significantly easier for people to join unions. And we know that where there are when a state switches from a union-friendly state to one which basically says unions get screwed out of their dues and their agency fees, that Democrats lose like 2 to 3 percentage points in the vote tallies. Why not something that also involves strengthening what has been the bedrock of Democratic electoral victories over the years, and that's union power?
Absolutely. I mean, I think card check is a no-brainer early on in a Democratic presidency. I think, in 2009, I don't think that we had the caucus that would do it. The reality is, as much as organized labor supports the Democrats, the love is not a two-way street, or it hasn't been until recently. And you have some anti-union people, particularly early in the Obama era, who were very powerful in the Democratic Party. And so they never made a serious effort, and I think that has to be rectified next time. And that's a good example of the sort of procedural things that you can do that will increase your power that are also the right thing to do. Increasing the structural power of workers is something that we should all support. I think that we need to hold Democrats in particular accountable for how they do or don't fulfill their campaign promises to organize labor. And gerrymandering is a great example. I'm really heartened by how much people have started to care about gerrymandering. In political science, we've been showing these maps to students for 30 years about the ridiculous districts. There's one here in Illinois where the district is shaped like a set of earmuffs, and this is a Democratic gerrymander. But the proposal in the book is like, let's take this whole gerrymandering thing off the table altogether, and the way that you do that is you, instead of electing one person out of each of the 435 districts, you create these larger multi-member districts. There's an organization called Fair Vote that has a proposal called the Fair Representation Act. And it would transform the system from single-member districts to multi-member districts. There'd be 3 or 5 members elected out of every district in the country. Same 435 membership in the House, but they'd be elected differently. I recommend doubling the size of the House.
But if you elected in like these sort of like larger districts, wouldn't you get into that problem of like at-large districts? Which, I know in the context of like urban elections, of city elections, it's always the at-large seats that go to wealthy people from one area of the city, and poorer districts end up having no representation.
Yeah, I mean that's why I think that the Fair Vote plan doesn't actually go far enough. Because if you increase, it's called the district magnitude, that's the size of the district, you end up with much more proportional outcomes, and you give more marginalized groups to have the opportunity to have somebody from their community elected into Congress. So I think the ideal would be actually 5 or 10 member districts in a much significantly larger House of Representatives. But overall, I think that the outcomes would be much more proportional for the parties. If you look last 2016. Republicans won the national popular vote for the House by like a point, and they have this enormous, 45-seat majority in the House. In 2012, the Democrats actually won the popular vote for the House, and they still had this minority. And I think there's 2 problems. There's gerrymandering, and then there's also, as you know, there's the concentration of Democratic voters in urban areas. So that's actually, even if we reverse gerrymandered the country, it'd actually be really hard to do to Republicans what they did to us, just because of where the voters are.
Right.
And even if you had nonpartisan voting districting commissions in every state in the union, I think that we'd still end up with a structural disadvantage in the House unless we move to a proportional system. And it's a big lift because it would require a lot of voter education. It takes me like 30 minutes to explain.
Well, no, I mean, the self-sorting is a real problem. But
yeah.
All right. Well, David Faris, we can hope that there'll be an opportunity to put at least some of these into effect over the next 3 or 4 years. David Faris, author of "It's Time to Fight Dirty: How Democrats Can Build a Lasting Majority in American Politics." Thanks so much for your time today. I really appreciate it.
Thanks for having me on the show, Sam. It was fun.
All right, folks, we got to take a quick break and head into the fun half of the program. I just want to remind you that Brendan's job is in jeopardy because today's program of the Majority Report was presented today by Smart News. Say goodbye to fake news, nasty trolls, and the filter bubble of your social networks. Get your news in 1 minute from 300 trusted media sources with Smart News. It's an app. It's available for free on the Apple App Store or Google Play Store. Check it out. Also, just a reminder, it is April, folks. And it almost feels like it's almost spring here in New York. Yet, in Madison, Wisconsin, it's the best time to buy some coffee. JustCoffee.coop, 30% off. You don't even need a coupon code. All month long. You go, you buy the, I always wanted to try the Majority Report blend. You go and you buy a Majority Report blend. I always wanted to try, what's the one that I should go and look at it. There is one that I'm on to now that I really like. I mean, I like the Majority Report blend. Don't get wrong. Don't get me wrong, folks. We have it here. But there is one that I do like that I can't remember the name.
I don't think it's the WTF.
It is. I can promise you, it is not the WTF blend.
Doubt that.
It's Just Coffee. What's going on here?
I'm sorry, Brendan. Is it the WTF?
Oh, I had too many E's on the justcoffee.coop. You head over there. There's 30% off all this month. Free shipping. I'll tell you which one I've been buying. Let's just give you, let's see. Oh, wow, look at that. They got some good ones. It's the Early Bird, I think, is one. That's a seasonal coffee. Which one is it? I think it's a medium roast. Gosh darn it. Soul Shaker? No, Ariba. That's what it is. It's the Ariba breakfast blend. Check that out. It's also in the same. Wow. You can get the Majority Report coffee right now for, what size is it? 12 ounces, whole bean for $9.80. Free shipping. If you buy coffee, folks, it's like robbing a co-op.
It's like literally robbing a co-op. You might as well just go to the Central American Fair Trade Cooperatives yourself and just steal it from the places. I mean, it's just incredible.
But you can do that all just from the comfort of your home.
Excuse me. I'll be taking my WTF blend now.
A 5-pound bag
out of Nicaragua.
5-pound bag, usually $73, is now $51. That's insane.
That is pretty insane.
That's insane.
That is like the type of
16 ounces per pound, right? Do I have that right? Nobody in here has any idea.
But I
was embarrassed to ask the question, and I looked at 4 people who just looked at me.
That's not my typical area, but that sounds about right. That's right. Yeah, that's correct.
What's that? How many ounces are in a pound? 16. Okay. I asked that question, and everybody looked at me blankly, and I was embarrassed to ask the question.
I thought it was 16, but then it might have been 12.
I can't even figure out. I can't figure out. That 5-pound bag is an amazing deal. So check it out, justcoffee.coop. Also, folks, this show relies on its members to continue. I don't know, April's tax time. We've lost some members. That happens. But for those of you who can afford to become members, now is a great time to do it. You support the daily show, guests like we had today, guests like we'll have tomorrow, guests like we'll have Thursday and Friday, and then Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, and Friday. And as a way of saying thank you to you, we give you the fun half, which is very often funner. I know, you're going from like a 10 on the fun scale, and then we go into the fun half, and it gets like to 11.5.
It's super fun, guys.
Right? So super fun. It's almost immeasurable. We've had to devalue our fun currency just to be able to deliver the amount of fun that we deliver in the second half.
You may have so much fun.
We had to get off
You may find yourself getting sick of how much fun you're
We had
having.
to get off the gold standard because we were just fiat printing fun.
Yeah, we just needed to
in
make it
the,
speculative
fun
currency because
Yes.
nothing could ground our
We
amount
have
of
a
fun into
blockchain
reality.
technology that develops so much fun.
You know,
on the
I
other
bet
fun.
there would be a type of person that you could actually convince that they love the content, even if they hated it, if you did it through blockchain. You'd be
Absolutely.
Like, well, I guess it's funny. I mean,
Yeah.
it's being delivered to me through blockchain. It has to be good.
That's right.
Crypto fun with crypto Jews.
Yeah, to listen to a podcast through blockchain, it takes like 4 hours for
Yeah.
it to check.
It's like the future is listening to podcasts that are 2 hours and then they become 5 hours through blockchain. This could disrupt everything. Why? Could you explain that? Well, think about it. I've got my own computer, right?
Check out, go to jointhemajority.report.com, jointhemajority.report.com to become a member. Also, today is Tuesday. That means it's the Michael Brooks Show day. And Ben Dixon on the program today. You can check it out on iTunes or live on our YouTube channel. Also, Patreon. Jamie's got her Patreon. It is patreon.com/Jamie Peck. And coming out with a new Antifada soon.
Yes, tomorrow, I believe.
And we will see you in the fun half. 646-257-3920.